Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandham at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.
In this episode, we're going to talk about some playmakers, both on the defensive and mostly the offensive side. Jersey number 81's coming up, and we have Joe Ziemba telling us all about these great players, that historian he is. And the 81s and the greatest players that ever wear it are coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com, and we have another bonus edition, Football by Numbers, Jersey number 81 tonight, and we have our good friend Joe Ziemba to help us with this. Joe Ziemba, When Football Was Football, the book, the podcast, the great historian. Joe Ziemba, welcome back to the Pigpen.
Darren, thank you so much. That's very nice of you to say those nice things. The check is in the mail, of course, but we're looking at an incredible group that wore number 81. Well, sometimes when we talk, we may struggle to get the top 10 because either guys didn't wear it long enough or maybe their achievements weren't worthy of the Pigskin top 10. But some of the folks we're going to talk about tonight, for example, we have a defensive back in the Hall of Fame who was such I'm not going to say dirty player, but such a ferocious or aggressive player that the NFL put in some new rules to calm him down a little bit. And then we have another Hall of Famer who played in the high school band rather than playing football. And finally, we have a contestant who was actually on the TV show Amazing Race with his wife and took third place. So all sorts of good stuff. We got a whole bunch of Hall of Famers and then just a whole trail of guys leading up that maybe will be in the Hall of Fame someday.
Yeah, this when you say that, we've had some tough times picking a top 10. Well, it's sort of the opposite. It's a tough time picking a top 10 because the Pro Football Hall of Fame gives us a big head start on this one. I have down that they marked 13 different players that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame that wore number 81. Now, before we came on, we were discussing, they have Deacon Jones wearing number 81, and neither you or I could find where he wore 81. So we probably won't be discussing that great player tonight. So just going down to the rest of the list of those players wore number 81, no particular order. We have Carl Eller, Terrell Owens, Tim Brown, Randy Moss, Shannon Sharp, Art Monk, Andy Robistelli, Night Train Lane, Dick was his first name, George Connor, Jackie Smith, Calvin Johnson, and Doug Atkins. That's quite a team right there.
That is an all-star lineup for sure, and I hope we can do them justice by giving our little snapshots of their careers.
I hope we do. Well, we'll just give it our great college try here to talk about these pros.
Good, and maybe I'll start out with a couple of guys with Chicago connections, which sometimes is my preference. I'll start out with one of the biggest names of all with Night Train Lane. As you mentioned, his name is Richard Lane, a defensive back, also played some end, played 14 years in the NFL, all of them with number 81. Mostly known for the 6 years with the Cardinals and 6 years with the Lions. But I was looking into his life. He was abandoned as a child, but still came around to be a 7-time Pro Bowler. He was named to the Hall of Fame's All 1950s team. But You might wonder, where did he get the name Night Train? Well, apparently when he was playing for one of the teams, there was a record out called Night Train by Jimmy Forrest. And he really liked it. Every time they would put that on in the locker room, he would start dancing. And that led to one of the more famous headlines in pro football history. And you'll see where this is going when he went up against Choo Choo Justice of the Washington Redskins. And the headline the next day, Night Train had a good day. It said, Night Train derails Choo Choo. I love that headline. and for such a ferocious guy in the field, he actually spent 17 years running the Detroit Police Department's athletic league. So I thought that was interesting. But he was the guy I kind of alluded to in our opening comments that for some rules changes, Night Train really loved to clothesline a ball carrier. He would take him out with his arm above the neck. Often, because this was legal, he would use the face mask to snap a runner down to the ground. And so the league put in the no face mask rule because of Night Train Lane, which I did not know about. So the clothesline was later prohibited as well. And Night Train, he wasn't sure he should have been outlawed for that or his way of playing. He said, my object is to stop the guy before he gains another inch. If I hit them in the legs, they may fall forward for a first down. So I grab them around the neck so I can go back to the bench and sit down. And in the book Paper Lion by George Plimpton, he writes something about when Night Train Lane really put a hit on Y.A. Tittle, the Giants quarterback in 62, when he said that hit literally knocked the plays out of Y.A. Tittle's head. He rendered the quarterback unable to remember any of the Giants' plays until after halftime. But he was, in NFL history, there was a poll one time that voted him the second most feared tackler in NFL history behind Dick Butkus. And Night Train Lane, or Richard Lane if we prefer, still holds the NFL season record for 14 interceptions. So Night Train, Hall of Famer, long career, wore 81 every year. I'm going to nominate him right off the bat to possibly be in our top 10 list.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. You look at his statistics. His first year in the league with the Rams, he led the league with 14 interceptions and 298 yards, like you just said. And then his first year with the Cardinals in 1954, he again led the league with interceptions, 10 and 181 yards returned. So some pretty good numbers in his first 3 years and the rest of his career as well.
Very consistent player. He certainly was.
Okay, would you like to talk about next?
Yeah, let's talk about a couple of Chicago Bears. You see what I do with the S in Chicago on the south side, the S becomes a Z, so Bears. We have a grocery store called the Jewel, which becomes the Jules. So I apologize for that. Let's get right into talking about Doug Atkins, 6'8", 260-pound defensive end, Hall of Famer. He was a giant man. He was quick. 17 years in the league, 15 of those with number 81, but best known for his 12 years with the Bears. He was an NFL champion twice, and he had an extraordinarily, he was listed or named 8 times to the Pro Bowl before, of course, the Hall of Fame brought him in. But I found a great quote about him. It was from John Facenda, I believe I pronounced that right, the narrator from NFL Films, who once said about Atkins, Atkins is like a storm rolling over a Kansas farmhouse. He came from all directions, and all there was to do was to tie down what you could and hope he didn't take off the roof. So that was Doug Atkins, another consideration for our top 10 tonight.
Absolutely. Another great player that you brought out of the passer. I'm glad you mentioned him again, too. Okay. What direction would you like to go next, Joe?
Well, the other Bear was a guy who went both ways and throughout his career, which started in 48 and ended in 55, was a Notre Dame graduate named George Connor. Played tackle and offense, but he was known as one of the first of the real linebackers who would move around. He spent 8 years with the Bears. He only wore number 81 4 years, so that may impact our decision tonight. But he was named All-Pro 5 times and was a member of the Hall of Fame's All 1940s team. Also, he's one of the 100 greatest Bears of all time. But this giant of a man at 6'3", 240 was actually born prematurely, weighed less than 3 pounds at birth, but became an outstanding player for the Bears. The sports writer Grantland Rice once said about Connor that he was the closest thing to a Greek god since Apollo. George Halas, the longtime, of course, owner and coach of the Bears, he said, "We always set high standards for George Connor, and he exceeded them." So he was, as we said, one of the first of those that mobile defensive men who was big, strong, and could move very quickly. So George Connor of the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, nice career he had. Only 8 seasons, but boy, he really had some great numbers during those seasons, had quite an impact on his teams he played on with the Bears. Okay. You have another older one you want to talk about too?
Yeah. We'll talk about Andy Robistelli. Andrew Richard Robistelli, a defensive end, played for the Rams, the Giants, 14 years in the league, 9 in which he wore number 81, elected to the Hall of Fame in 1971. But he came out of nowhere. He was a 19th round pick by the Rams because he played at a small place called Arnold College, which I don't even think is in existence anymore. He was the 7-time Pro Bowler, 2-time NFL champ, and he won the 1962 Burt Bell Award. He enlisted in the, I think it was the Army when he was only 18 years old during World War II, but came back, finished his education, had a long career, purchased a travel agency after he retired, but he also became director of operations for the Giants, which I guess they didn't have the real title of general manager then, but he might have been the first general manager of the Giants. But talking about his playing career, his teammate, defensive back Dick Lynch, once said about Andy, he said, "Andy made the big play in the clutch. I remember when we were playing Pittsburgh, which was trying to get into position for a field goal. We just had to get the ball. Andy tore in, upset the quarterback hard enough to fumble. Andy recovered the ball, and we were saved." So an aggressive and another ferocious defender, Andy Robistelli.
Yeah, those are some great players from the way back machine here. Over 5 decades for some of these guys, 6 decades that they played, but we're still talking about them today. That's a testament to the great play that they had in the NFL and why they made the Pro Football Hall of Fame as well.
Yes.
Now, I've got a few modern players here, more modern players. One that we just saw just less than a month ago going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And, our partner on Sports History Network, Arnie Chapman, one of his fan favorites is Calvin Johnson, Megatron. This man was just a beast among men, 6'5", 237 pounds out of Georgia Tech. And he was a second overall pick in the draft of 2007 for the NFL. And, he had 130 starts and 135 games that he dressed for. And the reason they called him Megatron is he was just, a big guy for one. We just told you his size, and he was very robotic-like and very smooth and fluid in his motions, and reminded whoever named him that, I think it was some of his co-players, of the character in the Transformers movies and comic books from the years back. That was sort of the bad guy. He was a big dominant player in those movies. So that's where Megatron got his name. But he earned NFL pass receiving yardage titles in 2011, 2012. And when he retired in 2015, which is a little bit early, a lot of people felt, he held the NFL records for receiving yards in a season with over 19,060 in 2012, and the most consecutive games with 100 or more receiving yards with 8. Still, he holds the Lions records for most receptions, 731, and receiving yards, 11,619. And you think about all those great traditions of, awesome players with the Lions. Calvin Johnson, definitely right up there at the top. He's a very dominant player. And in his career, he had a 9-year career, made 6 Pro Bowls, 3 times as an All-Pro, and was on the Hall of Fame's all-decade team of the 2010s, wore 81 his entire career. Tremendous player, Calvin Johnson.
And I think all of his opponents in the division were grateful when he took that early retirement. But I always thought the football was made of some kind of metal and he had magnets in his hands. That guy was just such an incredible receiver. And we miss watching him play, even though he was on the other side.
Most definitely. Now, another player from more of the modern era is another great receiver, and that's Randy Moss. And Randy, he had an awesome career himself. Now, he played a little bit longer than Megatron did. Came in 1998 with the Minnesota Vikings. If you remember, way back then, was teamed up with Chris Carter, and they had some great teams going on there. And just a fact that not a lot of people know: when Chris Carter and Randy Moss were receivers with the Vikings, they were had the tutelage. They're teaching another receiver, Larry Fitzgerald, who I believe was the ball boy on those Vikings teams.
Yes,
because his dad was one of the assistant coaches, I believe. So he had some pretty good teachers there with those two great Hall of Famers, and I'm sure he'll be a Hall of Famer himself here in a few years. But Randy, when he left Minnesota, he played for the Oakland Raiders for a couple seasons, and then went famously to the New England Patriots and helped them go on that run there in the late 2007 through 2010 seasons. Teamed up with Tom Brady and took him to a whole different level. But that man, he had 6 Pro Bowls himself, 4 times as an All-Pro. All 2000s team, 1998 AP Offensive Rookie of the Year, and stats going off the charts. His touchdown numbers were enormous. 17 touchdowns as a rookie. 15 in year 3. He hit 17 again another year midseason, and then with New England, he took that up a notch. His first year with the Patriots, 23 touchdowns in a season. So. Another great man that just had some hands of glue that anything thrown at him, he would catch. And, Randy wore the jersey for only 4 seasons, though. So maybe that's not enough to get him on our list, but a tremendous player all the same, because he wore 3 or 4 different numbers, I believe, during his career. But I want to make sure we mention him. Do you have some other players you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, we got another receiver, James Art Monk. 3-time Super Bowl winner, 3 times in the Pro Bowl, played just about all of his career with Washington, last couple of years with the Jets in Philadelphia. So he had a long, long career, wore number 81, all except his last season. He was the first to have over 102 receptions in one season. He did that in 1984 with an incredible 106 catches. 1,372 yards. And when you look over his career statistics, they're mind-boggling. 940 catches for over almost 13,000 yards.
Wow.
And as a wide receiver. So as I mentioned, that he was recognized for his work and being in the Pro Bowl, and also a member of the Hall of Fame's all 1980s team. So a consistent performer throughout his career, Art Monk.
Yeah, great player. I can remember his playing days, and very formidable opponent for DBs to go up against. I don't think they like playing against him, but he was sort of an iron sharpens iron guy. I think I read something not too long ago. He credits a lot with Darrell Green being opposite him in practice quite a bit. They had quite a few years together in their career, more so at the beginning of Darrell Green's career. But iron sharpens iron, and 2 great players from Washington. Okay.
We have another receiver, a tight end. We're going to go a little bit backwards for Jackie Smith, who had a great long career with the St. Louis Cardinals, 15 years with the Cardinals, finished up with Dallas for 16 years, and all with number 81, voted into the Hall of Fame in 1994. At the time, he was only the 3rd tight end to be elected into the Hall of Fame, but he was the one I mentioned when we started. He was in the school band in high school, didn't play freshman football. Someone said, hey, you should go out for football. And he got hurt just about every year. So he ended up only playing 5 football games during his high school career. And yet when he retired from the NFL, he had the most reception yardage of all tight ends in the Hall of Fame, I believe. And his 16.5 average per catch is still the highest for all the tight ends that are in the Hall of Fame. So Jackie Smith, great long career, and 15 years with number 81, wearing number 81.
Yeah, tremendous player. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people, they only remember that last season he played, he went with the Cowboys and had a decent season with them. He just wanted a championship ring, and they made it to the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, he had that drop pass on I believe it was a third down play, and the Cowboys ended up kicking a field goal and lost by 4. But people shouldn't remember for that. They should remember for the great statistics he had for all those great banner years with the Cardinals, because he was definitely one of the best tight ends ever to play.
Yeah, he was almost 500 catches for nearly 8,000 yards during his career.
Yeah, most definitely. Okay.
We'll go back to one other Hall of Famer we didn't mention because we're so top heavy with receivers. And this would be Carl Eller, a defensive end in the Hall of Fame. He played 16 years, and except for his final year, which was with Seattle, he played with Minnesota, made it to the Hall of Fame in 2004. And I believe he is still the Vikings' all-time sack leader with 130 and a half sacks. In 91, he was voted the NFL's Defensive Player of the Year. And this quarterback talked about him. He said, this is Fran Tarkington said, Carl Eller was ahead of his time. He was a huge man. He had great speed. He had great athletic ability. He had great intellect. He understood the game, and he was the dominant outside pass rusher of his day. And Tarkington said, no defensive end that has ever played has ever been any better than Carl Eller. And he was 6'6", 247, and quick as a cat, on his way to 6 Pro Bowls, and a member of the Hall of Fame's all-1970s team.
Yeah, boy, when you have 5 All-Pro seasons and the championship in '69 with the Vikings, people forget about those Vikings having that championship because it was still the NFL and the AFL there, and I believe that was when the Vikings won the NFL championship, but didn't win the Super Bowl. But great defensive player for the Vikings and Carl Eller. Now, I've got a couple more players that are in the Hall of Fame that I'd like to talk about. And one of them is sort of a real controversial figure, Terrell Owens. Now, Terrell, he came on like gangbusters with the San Francisco 49ers when they picked him up in 1996. And, had some tremendous seasons with them and stayed with that team for 8 seasons. And then he started bouncing around the league. I think he had a little bit of controversy with the coach, with the quarterbacks. He was one of those early wide receivers that they were donning with the term diva, and got his way a little bit. The media went crazy with that. I think they went a little overboard. But he went to the Philadelphia Eagles for a couple of years, and with Donovan McNabb and was playing with them, and Andy Reid, and left there. Then went to the division rival, the Dallas Cowboys, for 3 seasons. And that was kind of an interesting story that he went to Dallas because earlier in his career with San Francisco, he scored a touchdown and ran out to the giant star in the middle of Dallas's field and spiked the ball. And I believe some of the Dallas players didn't find that too fancy, and came out and gave him some extra licks there out at the midfield stripe there. But then he finished up his career, a year in Buffalo, a year in Cincinnati, and in 2010. And I heard a couple of years ago that he was trying to come back in. I believe it wasn't too long ago. He was trying to come back in the league after some retirement. But I don't think he's going to do that now that he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But 6 Pro Bowls, 5 times as an All-Pro, and just a tremendous player. And he's right up there on the list of all-time receptions, nowhere near Jerry Rice, but he has 1,078 catches, just a few yards shy of 16,000 yards, 153 touchdowns. And he's second all-time in touchdown receptions and third with passes caught. That's just an amazing feat for a guy that's sort of a journeyman for much of his career. Didn't stick with that one team, but played with some awesome quarterbacks and some great offenses, and he made them all a little bit better. Another player I wanted to talk about is Tim Brown. Tim Brown, I think he wore the jersey for 17 seasons. And for a wide receiver, we talked about Jackie Smith was 16, Art Monk was 15. Tim Brown, 17. And, great Notre Dame player. I believe he won the Heisman Trophy. I think it was late 80s when he won that. Just fantastic when he came to the NFL with the Oakland Raiders. And, not only as a wide receiver, but as a kick returner and punt returner as well. And, his another guy, his stats are just scream right off the charts. First round pick, 6th player overall in the 1988 draft, set the Raiders franchise records for receptions, receiving yards, and punt returns. There's not too many people that can say they did that for their franchise. And when he retired, those 14,934 receiving yards were second highest total in NFL history. 9 Pro Bowls in all 1990s team. But I couldn't see where Tim Brown ever was an All-Pro, which kind of surprised me with all the great seasons that he had. Tim Brown, another one of these great, more modern wide receivers that just dominated what they did. I don't know where all these guys were grabbing 81s when they were coming out to their teams out of college and really played well. Now, another player that we want to talk about is Shannon Sharp. Now, Shannon only wore number 81 for 2 seasons. I have him down as.
Right.
But there's another big receiver that was just, dominant. He played tight end, I guess, actually, with the Green Bay Packers with the Denver Broncos for his career. His brother played for the Green Bay Packers. But he was spent 12 seasons with Denver and then 2 seasons with Baltimore and been back to Denver again near the end of his career. But, another guy just had tremendous catching circle, 8 Pro Bowls, 4 All-Pro seasons, 3-time Super Bowl champion, both with Denver and with the Ravens, and all 1990s team. But again, only wore 2 seasons of having jersey number 81, and those were his first 2 seasons in Denver. I'm not sure why he made the change. That must be somebody wanted the number when they came to the team, and he was only in his 3rd year. Not sure. Didn't have the story on that, but out of Savannah State too is his college. So when you have that and you team that up with his brother, was another great player in the NFL. The Sharp family really had some great bloodlines there.
I think we did do the Hall of Famers. Then I've got 3 or 4 receivers. Well, another great player was Russ Francis. Played with New England for a good part of his career. Went out to San Francisco. 6'6", 240. And he started in 1975. He played 13 years in the league and all but one wearing number 81 on his way to 3 Pro Bowls, 1 Super Bowl. A great all-round athlete, Russ Francis was. He was held the national record for the javelin throw as a high school player or athlete. And he briefly tried pro wrestling, so after his football career, but he again was a really rugged tight end. In fact, the famous legendary announcer Howard Cosell once said about Russ Francis, he was an all-world tight end. And he was also in the finals of the Superstars TV show, which brought athletes from different sports to compete against each other. But some really good numbers for his career, 393 catches for over 5,000 yards during that long career as a tight end. So Russ Francis is one I wanted to mention. Another wide receiver is Amani Tumer. 13 years with the Giants, 11 wearing number 81. He's already in the Giants Ring of Honor. 5 straight years with over 1,000 yards in receiving. And he still holds 16 Giants receiving records, even though he's been out of the league since 2008. So Amani Tumer, a wide receiver, known for his time with the Giants, is another one I'd like to mention.
Yeah.
Now, one that may come up in the future is Anquan Boldin. Hope I pronounced that right.
Yes.
Played for the Arizona Cardinals, 14 years total. He also played for Baltimore and San Francisco and Detroit. Boy, his numbers are really off the board. 1,076 catches for almost 14,000 yards. He's not eligible for the Hall of Fame right now, but I think next year he might be. 3 times Pro Bowler, 1 time Super Bowl winner. He was Rookie of the Year in 2003, but boy, those monster numbers. Yeah. He also off the field won the 2015 Walter Payton Man of the Year. But he was one of those guys that made an initial impression. In his first game, he set an NFL receiving record for rookies by 217 receiving yards, which is amazing back in 2003. So he still, with all the many accomplishments he had, even though he retired rather early in before the 2017 season, he's the fastest to 300 career receptions. Only took him 47 games. He has the most receptions in his first 26 games with 157. And he was the fastest also to hit 400 and 500 career receptions and 7,000 yards in his career. So he still holds some records for both the Cardinals and the Ravens, I believe. Again, great numbers. Maybe someday we will see him in the Hall of Fame, but 7 seasons with over 1,000 yards receiving.
Yeah, he really broke the back of many a defense on third down. He was a great possession receiver because he was had such a thick build when he played, 6'1", 220 pounds, but just a wide target. And, those little slant patterns he would run because he was quick, had quick feet. And it was tough for DBs that were much smaller than him most of the time to cover him. Just a great possession receiver. And I think that's one of the reasons he had 82 touchdowns, but probably could have had a lot more, but he was playing, with some great outside guys, like Larry Fitzgerald for a majority of his career. And I think Steve Smith, even a little bit with the Baltimore. I might be mistaken on that, but I know they had some speedsters out there, but he was that guy over the middle you could always count on for the quarterback's best friend next to the tight end. That's for sure.
Yeah, right. Hey, here's a guy, Darren, you might enjoy. I always like finding players who nearly a half century away from the game still hold some records. And that's Carroll Dale, known for his work as a receiver, wide receiver, tight end, flanker with the Packers. He also played with the Rams, of course, and this final year with Minnesota, 14 years in the league. He only wore number 81 5 times, 5 years, but 3 times a Pro Bowler, 3 times an NFL champion. And he was a part of those first 2 Super Bowls with Green Bay. When we talk about a record holder, he still holds 3 Green Bay records for most yards average for receptions with 19.72. And most yards average reception per game of 46.5 for his average. And also in the playoffs with 18.41. So that's a catch, the average reception yards per catch. So some pretty lofty numbers. He was named to the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame in 1979, the College Football Hall of Fame in 1987. And you probably didn't know this, Darren, that the high school stadium, J.J. Kelly, where he went to high school, is named after him. So it's the Carroll Dale Stadium, where he went to high school in Virginia.
Wow, I did not know that.
Some big numbers, and it's been a long time, but he's still waiting for that call from the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, maybe we'll see him get in there one of these days, too. Great name from the past. Do you have anybody else you'd like to talk about?
I do. I have some favorite receivers that may not make our list, but they're fun, so I'll go through them kind of quickly.
Okay.
One is William Arthur Johnson. We all know him as White Shoes Johnson. When he was in high school, he used to dye his shoes white. That name stuck with him. And he was one of the first receivers when he scored a touchdown. We talked about Terrell Owens, but Billy White Shoes Johnson, he liked to do a dance called the Funky Chicken every time he scored. So he was known for that.
I've heard that you've been known to do that same dance sometimes.
Well, I tried, but my knees left the building the same time as Elvis.
Okay.
So I don't think we're going to get that going. Billy Johnson was named to the Hall of Fame All-1970s team, and he was also named as a punt returner on the NFL's 75th year anniversary team, and he's the only one named to that 75th anniversary team that's not in the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
So 14 years, as I said, and 3 years All-Pro, but really great receiver and returner. After his football career was over, during his football career, he also tried playing pro softball, and he's now coaching in Georgia at Duluth High School. So he really, when we talk about leagues competing, when he came out of college, he played a year in Canada where he got a nice salary, I guess, to go up there, but came back to the NFL, made the All-70s team and the All-80s team. So Billy White Shoes Johnson. And another guy real quick who played for the Bears, Bobby Ingram, 14 years in a career with the Bears in Seattle. Great year in 1998 when he had 987 yards receiving with 64 receptions. So probably not on our top 10 tonight, but wanted to mention him because of the numbers that he did put up in his career. He did have 650 catches for nearly 8,000 yards. And we talked about brothers playing earlier. So I wanted to mention Rocket Ishmael. And his brothers' nicknames were Missile and Bomb. So we had Rocket, Missile, and Bomb, all played football. He spent 9 years in the NFL, 6 years wearing number 81. He signed a record contract with Toronto coming out of college, out of Notre Dame. Everyone expected him to be the number one draft choice. Instead, he took the biggest contract from what I understand in the history of Canadian football. He would have been the number one choice. But he played well in Canada. He was an all-star in 1990. What year was that? No, I should have written it down, I guess. And he was the MVP of the 79th Grey Cup after being second in the Heisman Trophy running while he was at Notre Dame. And then one more receiver of note going back a few years is Howard Twilly, who played at Tulsa. We don't see a lot of big pro names coming out of Tulsa, but he won 2 Super Bowls. And after finishing also, like the Rocket did, second in the Heisman Trophy in 1965. And that year he was set an NCAA record, which has since been broken with 1,779 receiving yards. He joined the Dolphins. Actually spent his entire career, 11 years with Miami. And he was only one of 2 players that were on the original Dolphins team in 66, who were then on the perfect 1972 team. And did you know, Darren, that after he retired, he owned 28 of the Athlete Foot stores. So he did well off the field as well.
No, I did not know that. Now, I have a couple more players that I don't think we mentioned, but stop me if we did, because sometimes I forget to mark them down. But Torrey Holt, one of those great receivers, best known from The Greatest Show on Turf. He was another one that had 7 Pro Bowls, one time as an All-Pro. Of course, that Super Bowl championship with Kurt Warner and the rest of the fellows there with the Rams, and all 2000s Hall of Fame All-Decade team for him. And, during his career, 13,382 yards, 74 touchdowns, and 173 games. So a great career for him, for Torrey Holt. Terence Mathis is another player, only made the Pro Bowl one time, but he was a fantastic wide receiver with the New York Jets for 4 seasons, and then went to Atlanta for another 8 seasons and played a final season in Pittsburgh in 2002. A nice career for him, a little over 8,800 yards and 63 touchdowns. Jack Gregory, a defensive end from some of those great Cleveland teams of the late 1960s, early 70s, and then became a Giant in 1972 and returned to Cleveland. But he's another one, had 106 unofficial sacks, according to the Pro Football Reference, the work of John Turney and Nick Webster recently. We got that. And I'm not sure if I'm going to say his name right. Maybe you can correct me. Wardell Bross of the Colts.
Actually, I looked that up, and it's Bracey.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, those are some great Colts teams, 57, played. So that means he played in the 58, greatest game ever played. Also played all the way through 1968. So I think he might've just missed Super Bowl III, but played on some of those great teams. I think, Art Donovan was one of his teammates for much of his career. And, another great player that we should remember here. 2 Pro Bowls for him and 3 NFL championships with the Colts.
It was interesting that apparently he hosted a TV show with Art Donovan. Can you imagine those 2 guys getting together? That had to be great. And Bracey was a great pass rusher. And there's a good quote about that from him from those early years. He said, "I learned that if you want to stay around, you darn well better get in the passer's face." That's a great quote from a defensive end.
I don't think I'd want to be messing with that defensive line of those Colts. There's some bad gentlemen there playing, great football players, but they're sure mean on the football field to the opposition. Yeah. That's for sure. Now, do you have anybody else you want to mention before we go into
just a couple quick ones, and we can get on with our voting. Marcus Pollard, a tight end, played in the league 14 years, wore number 81 for 13 of those years, played on 5 teams. Another unique story. He never played college football.
Really?
And he got picked up by the Colts, who saw some potential with him, and it took a little while to get going, but eventually he made his mark. And, over 349 receptions for 4,280 yards. But when we started our conversation tonight, he was the one. He and his wife finished third in the Amazing Race TV show. And then he now is director of player development for Jacksonville. So he stayed with the league after starting in 95 and ending up in 2008.
Nice. Okay. And
the only one I have left is Jeff Graham, a wide receiver, 11 years. And I'm kind of looking for who wore that number 81. And he wore 81 all 11 years with 6 teams as a receiver. Jeff Graham played for Pittsburgh, for Chicago, the Jets, Philadelphia, San Diego. Best year was with the Bears in 95 with 82 receptions for 1,301 yards. And now he's coaching high school football in Ohio. So Jeff Graham maybe won't make our top 10 list, but another gentleman that was had a nice, long, solid, consistent career in the National Football League.
Yeah, I agree. And I have maybe one more to add here. Anthony Carter, he played with both the Vikings and the Lions, stayed in that NFC Central, but had a little over 7,700 yards, 55 touchdowns during his career. And, 3 Pro Bowls for him. And, probably not going to make our top 10, but still a significant player that we should mention. Okay. I think, we're probably at that point where we got to make the tough decisions here.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of people here to choose from. We have we have a dozen or so Hall of Famers. Some of them we know didn't play very long. Let's just remind everybody of that. Randy Moss didn't wear the number 81 for that long. Randy Moss only wore it for 4 seasons. Shannon Sharp for 2, George Connor for 4, and everybody else wore it for 9 years or longer. So I'm not sure if on the grounds of that, maybe those folks are maybe not considered, maybe they are. There's some good.
Yeah, I think we probably, because of our list, is of course looked up to, and every week media around the world checks on this list. So we've got to be perfect with it. But I think we've got to have some criteria, and maybe establishing a limit of 5 years this week only to have worn the number 81 will help us reach our decision.
Boy, that's just going to crush all the books in Vegas now. We just took those guys out. So, okay, so we got those 3 eliminated. So that takes us down to, I count 9 Hall of Famers, and then a lot of great players that are not in the Hall of Fame yet. But I really think, Tim Brown probably ought to be on that list. He's one that we probably ought to have on that list early here.
Oh, right. Yep.
And I would probably say another one is Dick Night Train Lane, for his great contributions. You agree with that?
I do agree, yes.
Okay.
And I'd like to put Doug Atkins in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great player. So that is 3. I think Calvin Johnson, definitely, with what he did in such a short span, he is one of the best players to ever wear that number 81. And plus, we would probably both be getting a phone call tonight after this airs from a guy in Flint, Michigan, if we didn't do that. So that takes up 4 spots. And who else do you like on here?
Well, there's so many big names. I think Carl Eller should be on there.
I agree. So that's 5.
And, of course, I'm partial to Jackie Smith.
Yeah, I think Jackie Smith should be on there. He was one of the best tight ends to ever play. So I think he needs to be on there also. Okay, let's look here. Some of our non-Hall of Famers that we really like, maybe a Russ Francis.
Yeah, I was going to say Russ Francis probably be my next choice. Of we've talked about.
I agree. So there's our first non-Hall of Famer that got put on our list. That takes us to 7. We have 3 more to choose. Art Monk, maybe? Maybe he had a great long career.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's 8
years.
Right. And boy,
I kind of like Bolden. Bolden's got some monster numbers for.
Yeah, he definitely does. Yeah, we got to get Anquan on there. He was a great one. So that takes us to 9. We have one more to choose here for our top 10, and there are so many good players.
Include Andy Robistelli?
You know what? I think with the Hall of Fame credentials, I think that's a great pick.
Yeah.
So let me review here and make sure we got 10. So we have Tim Brown, Dick Night Train Lane, Doug Atkins, Calvin Johnson, Jackie Smith. Well, maybe I missed. Maybe we only have 9. Anquan Bolden, Russ Francis, and Andy Robistelli and Art Monk. I think. Oh no, we do. Carl Eller. He's the one I miss.
Carl Eller. Right.
Yep. So there's our 10. So
all
wow.
Right.
Yeah, that was even hard counting them at the end there. There's so many great players. I color code these as we talk, and looks like I have a Crayola crayon box here on this one. This is one of the more colorful charts that we've made. So, wow, thank you. That was I don't know about you. I'm worked up a sweat. It's hot out already, and I think that was a good workout.
That was a good one, and so many superb players. So I'm glad we got a chance to talk about them. That was great. Thank you, Darren.
Yeah, well, thank you. Now, what do you have coming up on the When Football Was Football podcast? You know, we're anxiously awaiting to hear what's coming up next.
2, I think, intriguing shows. Of course, that's what I think. Others will fall asleep immediately, but our next episode is going to talk about what happened to the Chicago Bears when George Halas retired, which he did 3 or 4 times, but the 2 times that he retired because he wanted to get away from it, back in the 30s and again in the 50s and the 40s, he went in the service, so he didn't really retire. And then he finally retired from football in 68. So we're going to see, did the Bears fall apart completely without Papa Bear at the helm, or did they do okay? So there's some interesting stories there. And then the episode following, we're going to look at some mini scandals of the NFL. We hear about the big scandals like Spygate and ineligible people, etc., or rating rosters when it wasn't legal. But we're going to talk about little scandals that affected teams. For example, a Chicago Cardinal player who turned his back on the team to become a Hollywood movie star. Or maybe George Halas dipping into the college ranks when everybody knew, this is not Red Grange, it's after Grange, it was against the rules. So there'll be some fun stories there in our next 2 episodes, focusing on, again, some of the nice historical aspects of the National Football League.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Grange is what immediately popped in my mind when you said this. So if it's not Grange, I'm going to have to listen in and see who you have to talk about on that. That's very intriguing. Well, Joe, I thank you very much for sharing your knowledge once again and the great stories and research that you have on these excellent players. You do them such great justice to remember them by, and that's what we're all about. And we thank you for that and appreciate your time tonight.
Darren, thank you again for allowing me to share some of this information we found. It's always a pleasure and just a lot of fun talking about it. So I hope we did justice to number 81 tonight. Thank you very much.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.